A new JaVale McGee interview. Etuan Moore signs with the Orlando Magic, leaving the Suns. And did the Suns do the best that they could with what they had this offseason now that the dust has settled? All of it coming up on today's Locked On Suns.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. I'm your host, Brendon Kleen. I cover the Suns and the NBA at Dime Magazine, as well as right here on this podcast. Follow me at Brendon Kleen 14 on Twitter. Follow the show on Twitter at lockedonphxsuns. Another grab bag of topics today. JaVale McGee giving an interview to 98.7 here locally in Phoenix. We also have the news that that Etuan Moore has left the Suns officially and returning to the Orlando Magic, where he previously played earlier on in his career. I believe it might have been the team that drafted him. I'm not exactly sure. He's headed back there. I'll give some memories, thoughts on him and his departure. And then that'll be a nice segue into something I've wanted to do for a while, which is the offseason's not fully done in the NBA. It seems like we might see some Ben Simmons movement. Maybe there is some sort of Thaddeus Young trade. We'll have to obviously see, but it's a good time, I think, to really sort of evaluate as the dust has settled here of, did the Suns do the best that they could with what they had? Did we can pick nits with their offseason. We can see, they did this, they could have done this, they didn't do that, but given where we thought they would be able to get compared with what they actually did, what does that look like? What did that look like? And how did it set them up for success this season? So hopefully a nice way to sort of put a little bit of a bow on the offseason and be a little bit more honest rather than rumors and ifs, ands, and buts. We'll just sort of look holistically at things. Hope everybody is ready for the football season. I'm excited. Got the dread, the existential dread of another Cardinals season. Have not let go of the 3-5 finish to last season. Have not really let go of the Malcolm Butler retirement, but that is what's on my mind today. I'm sure many of you can relate. And excited though. Last year I didn't really dive into football. It felt a little weird. I wasn't just ready to wrap my head around it in early September that the NFL was back and dive into a sport. The bubble was going on still, all of that. So I'm looking forward to it. I imagine you guys are too. There is a Kool-Aid to be drank with regard to the Cardinals. You hear somebody like Mina Kimes saying that they could be frisky, and you let yourself have hope. We'll have to see. Check out Locked On Cardinals. That was not an intention to plug. It's what's on my mind. But those guys do a great job, Bo and Alex over there. I've been listening every day. They're up on YouTube as well. So big shout out to them. Should be a fun season. But the other sports news of the day today was this JaVale McGee interview. And I do want to discuss a few takeaways from it. Namely, number one, first off, it really reminded me, it was on Burns and Gambo, not unlike the Jay Crowder signing back in, interview rather, back in December after his signing. And the reason it reminded me of that Crowder interview is that it's another example of the system and the players really appealing to veterans. Now, again, we're going to get to this at the end of the show. There's obviously that optimism that it could have extended further, right? You can look at this offseason and say, oh, wow, well, if it's so attractive, then why did we not get this player or that player, and on and on. And I get that. But Crowder and now McGee, it's two consecutive off seasons where the Suns were able to get a player basically at their value, at not a huge overpay, and be attractive enough to those players that you actually get them. I mean, you win the sweepstakes. And so it really just reminded me of that. It was, McGee talking about envisioning himself here, the ease with which big men are able to score and get involved with Chris Paul at point guard. It was, knowing that DeAndre Ayton just needs that support system, especially last year, something I talked about a ton, that he didn't really, the first year in his career where he did not have a backup center to really push him. I mean, the first 2 seasons of his career, Ayton had elite backup centers, some of the best backup fives in the entire NBA between Rashawn Holmes and Aaron Baines. And last year was a huge departure from that. So all of that stuff was very reminiscent of what we heard from Jay Crowder, in that there was just that appeal of, I want to play with this group of players, and I feel like this system is one where I'm going to be really impactful. And obviously the finals just doubled that down. And McGee, of course he should want to come here. He's a player who has been sort of ringed for quite a while at this point. So it's not a surprise. It's not as if he picked some unlikely destination like even you could say Crowder did. But it was interesting to hear him say that. I also want to quickly just highlight that if you go and listen to that interview, if you happen to catch it in real time on the radio, don't overlook the fact that McGee specifically shouted out the fact that Monty Williams and James Jones are both black head coaches and GMs, black leadership in this organization. Players care about that type of stuff. It is not a coincidence that we saw 6 of the 7 head coaches in the NBA this cycle be people of color. It's not a coincidence that increasingly, organizations that want to connect with players are going with former players. Not all of them being black, but a guy like Steve Nash getting a shot early, quote unquote, ahead of schedule, or down to Monty Williams and James Jones. Those things do matter. And McGee putting that into words was illuminating. And it was really cool to hear that the infrastructure the Suns have put together here, that aspect of it mattered to him, stuck out to him, just in terms of being able to relate to and connect with and trust the people leading this group. The backup center part, though, was the other thread that I thought was pretty interesting. Namely, it was making me think of a less talked about, but obviously very important part of what a backup center is for an organization. And that sounds very simple, but it's security and insurance against foul trouble in a way that I don't think we really were talking about necessarily during the finals. Or during the playoffs all throughout. One is because Ayton has the skill, and one of the good things about him as a defender is that he doesn't foul, right? He can guard without fouling. He can, handle Nikola Jokic one-on-one without needing either the double team or the foul to bail him out. He can kind of play him to a draw in that way. But at the same time, I just think you have to watch those finals, and the way that Ayton was, the style, the manner in which Ayton was defending Giannis Antetokounmpo is really where the issue for me was. That at least makes me feel like it was somewhere in his head, I can't get into foul trouble. He was fouling Giannis a ton, but even on some of those calls where there were fouls, and obviously we all remember the hoopla surrounding whether those were fouls or not fouls, I think by the end you were seeing, the turning away, I think you could call it in a certain way, defending scared a little bit. And to me, I think there has to be a part of it there that changes if I can play this guy physically, and I don't have to worry that if I have to leave the game with foul trouble, that our team is going to fall apart. Now, is JaVale McGee necessarily the answer one-on-one against Giannis? No, but you can imagine a situation where Ayton did get in foul trouble, left the floor, and the Suns were able to stay afloat a little bit better because they could have a Jay Crowder or whomever go guard Giannis while also keeping a rim protector and a defensive anchor on the floor. Ayton was both things for the Suns, not only in that series, but also against, the Lakers, and at different times in the regular season, we saw that happen. So I do think Ayton has to get stronger and more patient and more skilled as a defensive player for those matchups going forward. But I can't help but think that it will help Ayton to know, I have a great backup. I have a veteran and a player I trust right there behind me. So I can do this. I can, give up a few fouls here and there that I might not have otherwise because I know that guy's there. So definitely recommend everybody go check out that interview. Obviously, Burns and Gambo do a good job interviewing all those guys. That's not surprising anybody, me saying that, but go catch it. And, that's a little bit of taste of what I had. I think McGee's going to be a great addition. I think for all of those reasons, I think he's a great, great, great locker room dude. He has connected with players everywhere he has gone. LeBron James loved him. Rajon Rondo loved him. The Warriors obviously loved him to bring him back the way that they did and trust him to be their starter with that dynasty sort of, in the middle of its heyday. All of that leads me to believe that he's going to be a pretty seamless addition. And the more you hear from him and about him, the more that it obviously comes across. So that'll wrap us up for McGee. I'll talk about each one more just a second. Just give some memories because he was part of some crazy, crazy moments. And I just want to reminisce, and him signing out in Orlando is a good opportunity to do that. First, though, a quick word from DirecTV. I know this sounds familiar. You've got one device that lets you watch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You've got sports highlights going on your phone, and your neighbor's best friends log in for all of the good stuff. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no need to buy another device ever again, and the best part, there is no annual contract either. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more about DirecTV Stream at directtv.com. That's directtv.com to learn more about DirecTV Stream. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. Okay, so each one more headed to the Orlando Magic on a 1-year minimum contract. I'll start by saying that I am pretty surprised that each one was able to go out and get a deal. I'm just being honest. I'm just being realistic, I think. This is a player who was out of the rotation for much of the season, who just, to me, at least, it looked physically, I said this time and again last year, I'm not, being any sort of revisionist here, that he just physically did not have it anymore. I think he is a good locker room guy. We never heard a peep from him or from Langston Galloway, who, if you had told me that Galloway was going to be on the board still and Moore would get a contract first at age 32 going on 33, that would really have surprised me. But neither one of those guys ever complained about their role, never had a problem with the way that they were used, the place that they had in the rotation. So, obviously a huge tip of the hat to them for that. But Moore heads back to Orlando, which I said at the top of the show was the team that drafted him. I thought it was the Celtics. I think that Boston drafted him and Juwan Johnson, both of the guys who were on that Purdue team. That was pretty fun in the 2010-11 season. But Boston did draft him, and Orlando was where he went right after that, really where he broke out. And I'm sure that's why I remembered that. But, maybe it feels like home. I mean, Indiana's home to him. Chicago, that area is really more like home. But finds a landing spot and gets that contract, which was not a guarantee. Based in some ways on how little he played. But I did, like I said, want to reminisce a little bit. 2 moments in particular that I will always remember each one more for. One, Cleveland Cavaliers. Wow. I just am going to Venmo you guys a bunch of money. I'm leaving that in, and you heard me struggle. The Cleveland Cavaliers came to Phoenix, and actually it was JaVale McGee on that team. That was when him and Andre Drummond were just doing absolutely whatever they wanted to be doing. And anyway, it was a game when either none or very, very few fans were being let into the building. I believe it was prior to any fans being around. But for whatever reason, the media section was full, and I was shoved up to, very bizarre. If you guys can even imagine that this was happening. So there's 0 fans in the building, and yet there's only the one media section downstairs. They hadn't come up with this club level media situation that they had in the finals and everything else. So they put me, and I got to give shouts to Trevor Booth, who's been on this podcast, writes at Bright Side of the Sun. Him and I, solo, the 2 of us, up in the basically rafters. We are in the 300 level. Again, no other fan in the building. And media downstairs full. So me and him, just the 2 of us upstairs. watching Cavs Suns in an empty 20,000 seat venue. Very, very bizarre experience, but you'll remember that game because E'Twaun Moore absolutely went off. And it was a game where Chris Paul did not play. And it was a game where, again, as I said, when called upon, these guys answered that call. E'Twaun Moore, I want to find it, scored 17 points, played 39, basically 40 minutes. Again, 17-4. And they won the game by 6. That was a weirdly close game. Darius Garland went off in that game. And again, without Chris Paul, the Suns were just sort of basically starting to find their groove, and Chris had to miss the game. And so there we go. It was the second game back with fans. So I will give the Suns a little bit of credit there. There must have been some amount of fans in there, but nearly empty. And it was echoey and cavernous up there, squinting from the upstairs and watching this bizarre game where E'Twaun Moore takes on JaVale McGee, Andre Drummond, and the Cavs. Very, very strange, but I will always remember that E'Twaun Moore game. Basically his best game of the season. The other obvious one that I'm sure everybody will remember is game 1 against the Los Angeles Lakers. Chris Paul, a few minutes in, goes to the ground. Everybody hears a crack, and the man dislocates his shoulder / aggravates his neck. A stinger, quote unquote. Still very skeptical of that diagnosis, but of course, who comes in but E'Twaun Moore and plays 2 minutes and 2 seconds. And the offense obviously fell apart a little bit. He was able to stabilize things, though. And the Suns obviously go on to win that game. Chris Paul did come back. But, of course, every Suns fan will remember that he came in during that game, would come in again in game 5 for a similar reason, played 9 minutes in that one. And then throughout the rest of the playoffs, played garbage time here and there. Games 1 and 2 of the Clippers series, of course, he's in there for about 10 or 11 minutes each time. Not really doing much, to be completely honest. But that first game in that playoff run when Paul leaves, and all of a sudden, I did 3 days of preview content for that first round series, and suddenly E'Twaun Moore is on the court in a role that I never ever imagined he would be in. Of course, none of us did. But nobody will forget that E'Twaun Moore stepped onto the floor in that game. The Suns obviously won it, which makes it even more memorable. But those are the 2 times that I, couldn't help but be stared into the face of E'Twaun Moore. So goodbye. You will forever be on the Western Conference champion T-shirt roster. If they make those, I didn't buy one. I'm not sure. You'll be there, and you'll be a bizarre part of Suns trivia, E'Twaun Moore. Goodbye, and enjoy Orlando and keep getting that bag. All right, let's close the show out with a exercise that I've wanted to do for a minute on just judging what the Suns actually did compared to what they could have done, because I think sometimes we get ahead of ourselves about we wish that this could have happened. Might this thing potentially play out? But just let's zoom out and just say, here's what they had. Here's what they did. Was it appropriate and right? All right, let's do that in a quick second. First, though, a quick word from Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar ever, my favorite protein bar. And Built Bar likes to say the healthiest candy bar ever, and I don't blame them, because really that is what these things are like. You can go right down the list and find a candy bar equivalent. In fact, Built Bar has done taste tests with those candy bars. So you take a coconut Built Bar, you take an Almond Joy candy bar, you taste test them blind, and these folks, they have found that people at the very least can't tell the difference. At the very best, prefer the Built Bar. Might sound hard to believe. It isn't. It's really not that crazy when you have tried one. So I encourage each and every one of you to do it. All of them covered in 100% chocolate. They are soft and easy to chew. They're not chalky. They're not hard. They're not filling. They're no more than 180 calories, no more than 5 grams of sugar, but packed with 17 to 18 grams of protein. All of them. That's without a doubt. Even the ones like mint brownie or salted caramel, all that can't possibly be healthy. Yes, it is, and it is delicious as well. So go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15 when you make your purchase to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Today's show also brought to you by BetOnline.ag. Get ready for football season kickoff, just a short way away from when most of you will be listening to this. Sign up today at betonline.ag. Use the promo code NFL 100 when you sign up. And here's what you're going to get to do. Make a bet on the September 9th, that's today, season opener between the Bucs and the Cowboys. And even if you lose that bet, your wager will be refunded up to $25. So that's promo code NFL100. At the same time, when you sign up, use the promo code Locked On when you make your first deposit. So NFL 100 when you sign up, Locked On when you make your first deposit. And what that will get you is a 100% welcome bonus. That's right. They are doubling your money just to celebrate football season. BetOnline is that excited that football is back. I am too. Here's the last couple of things. After opening day is done, after you've gotten that double your money sign-up bonus, you're going to go to BetOnline, start perusing their odds, props, and contests, constantly updated, your number one spot for all sports betting action. But be sure to check out the internet's biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor contest, both open now at BetOnline. You'll want to bookmark those pages. Those are going all season long. Once again, BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports, and really the one-stop shop for all of your football content and contests, both all season long. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Okay. Closing things out here with some thoughts on the Suns offseason. I mean, obviously we've been doing that for a while, but more specifically, what did they have and what did they do with it? Because that is really, at the end of the day, the only way you can judge something. We can all pretend, and I can go on the Bright Side of the Sun comments, or I can go to Suns Reddit, or I can go to different people on Twitter in my mentions, and I can see, oh, we should have gotten Bradley Beal. Okay, well, great. I mean, I concur. We should have tried to get Bradley Beal here in the Valley, but that wasn't going to happen, and he didn't even change teams. So that's really what led me to want to do this, is that the offseason didn't end up being as adventurous and crazy as it could have been. So we didn't see really any of the big trades. We didn't see Pascal Siakam move. We didn't see Bradley Beal move. We still haven't seen Ben Simmons move. And at the same time, really the biggest free agent that changed teams was Kyle Lowry, and that's not a player the Suns were ever going to be in on anyway. So this wasn't the type of offseason like years past where it's like, oh, Josh Jackson for Kyrie Irving, or, they need their point guard. Was Ricky Rubio the right guy, or should they have gotten so-and-so? Or, if they had, heaven forbid, not done the Chris Paul trade in 2020, it could have been a huge point of contention. But this offseason, there really wasn't this obvious clear-cut move that they should have done that they missed on. So let's set the stage. If you rewind all the way back to late July, coming off the finals, the Suns basically were looking at a situation where the Suns, if Chris Paul was priority number one, they were looking at, if they wanted to keep him, they're probably going to be, they are going to be over the cap, and there's a chance they'll hit the tax. That was really the baseline. Cameron Payne, we expected if they keep him and Paul, they're clearly going to be in the tax. If they have to, spend a little more to keep Paul than they would like, does Cam Payne go away? These were the conversations we were having. Obviously, if they had for some reason lost out completely on Paul, then they could have potentially created some cap room. However, it never made a ton of sense. So really we're looking at a situation where, what was the contract for Chris Paul like? How did they keep Cameron Payne, and what did that contract look like? And what did they do with the rest of their exceptions to fill out the roster and improve on last year? So really my viewpoint was always run it back plus. You have to keep what you had. Maybe Torrey Craig goes, but other than that, you got to keep the 10 that you have in place, and then get better past that. And that was always the benchmark for me. So I think if you look at it from that perspective, you have to be pretty excited. The number 1 and 2 bullet points were huge successes. You re-signed Chris Paul for less than expected, especially with a lot of flexibility at the end of the contract. And you re-signed Cameron Payne for less than expected with flexibility at the end of the contract. And again, not to say that I'm rooting for the Suns to not pay the tax, because personally, I don't care. Robert Sarver can pay whatever he wants, and I'm not going to protest in any way, shape, or form, especially because he should have paid more for the arena renovation. So I'm definitely not going to give him an out to not pay for the roster. That all being said, I do feel like not paying the tax this year means that you might be more willing to, from a management perspective, do it next year. I'm not saying that I'm just locking that in. Obviously, I'll believe it when I see it, but they have paid the tax before. So not doing it this season means probably next season there's even more likelihood that they will do it once the new extensions kick in for Bridges and Ayton, on and on and on and on. That flexibility was very productive in terms of the long-term outlook of the roster. So those are clear-cut wins. I think the next portion is where you start to run into some issues. So obviously signing JaVale McGee on the contract that they did, 1 year, $5 million, no issue with that. Could he have been a little cheaper? Sure, but it doesn't really matter that much. Unless you were getting him for the biannual exception of $3.7 million, which obviously would be nicer because it slots into that exception. You don't have to use the mid-level exception at all, which is what the Suns ended up doing. But I don't think, I believe he made 4.1 or 4.2 million last season. He has a market. He's probably the best replacement sort of traditional fill-in stopgap center that there is. And he's a veteran and all that stuff. So I don't really pick nits with that too much. But the mid-level part is where I do start to pick nits. And I think that's where you get to this gray area of it's a little bit of an incomplete, but it's also there is some criticism that's warranted. So that $5 million comes out of the mid-level exception, which is about $9.5 million total. That I think that's a little bit low. I'm looking at a preview article from, I believe, before the cap was finalized. So I think it might have come out to be a little bit more than that. But at the end of the day, you took $5 million out of that. You still have 4.5 left, and you didn't use the biennial exception, and you instead filled out your roster, the Suns did, with minimum players who, again, I don't necessarily have an issue with because I don't expect it to matter too much, but you lost out by using the roster spots that way and not using the extra money that you have at your disposal. You lost out on the opportunity to get better players. That's just a fact. You can get somebody better for $3.7 million than you can for the minimum of 2.1 or 2.6. It's just pretty obvious that that's how any labor market will work. You're going to get players better because you pay them more, and the players who take more money likely to be better. So, you imagine a world in which who could they have gotten for $3.7 million if they just were willing to outbid some other team at the backup point guard spot? Could they have gotten somebody better than Elfrid Payton if they're willing to use more than the max? Could they have gotten another, big man stopgap fill-in bench piece like a Frank Kaminsky for more than for more than the minimum if they had been willing to give that 3.7 up? I think so. Now, with the mid-level specifically, I think there is some incomplete part of this, and that's what I was getting to. Because that 15th roster spot remains open, doesn't appear that it's going to be filled before the season unless somebody gets cut loose in training camp that's really, really, juicy. I don't think that's where we're headed. It seems to me like that's going to stay open until the buyout deadline or the trade deadline. So in that way, you have the mid-level exception that you can give a little bit more money to a buyout player. I'm going to choose to assume that is the plan. At least that's one of the options the Suns are keeping open for themselves by not spending the remaining $4.5 million of that mid-level. But it's an incomplete because we just don't know. What if nobody great becomes available? What if there is no guy worth $4.5 million, or they're not interested in coming to Phoenix? Well, now you filled your roster out with minimum players. You didn't shoot as high with that option, and then now you're kind of screwed out of finding a great player in that market. So again, there's also a lot of time until opening night, opening tip. There's all sorts of things that come up during the season. Maybe they just keep that mid-level exception open because they find a trade that helps them fill in that roster spot. I don't know. We don't know yet, but the flexibility was what they chose to prioritize over the rest of what they could have done in terms of signings, trades, etc. That's all to say, the flexibility that they created for themselves, the fact that the tax was avoided and they were still able to get their players. They didn't avoid the tax because they decided that Payne wasn't a priority. They avoided the tax by just finding contracts that were team friendly and seemed to be fine, amenable to the players also. So that's a huge win. They got a good player and they kept some flexibility. That's all good. I will just add one last note, which is the draft situation, I think, is also an incomplete because they didn't take the players. I mean, the draft in and of itself is incomplete for, at least a player's first contract. We just don't know, especially for somebody picked 29th, who's going to be good from that range and who's not. And even then, if it's this guy picked at 38 becomes a pretty good player, were the Suns really going to take that player? It's very, very difficult to say. But even more so than that, Landry Shamet, I think a lot of how I will personally evaluate this offseason is going to come down to what Landry Shamet looks like and whether they're willing to re-sign him. Because you could envision a situation where Shamet taps into some playmaking potential, becomes an even better shooter, and is able to stay on the floor as a key part of a finals level rotation for the Suns. And they use some of the flexibility from the perspective of the salary tax going into next season, where they're able to re-sign him and not really, really up their bill that much. And that suddenly would look very, very, very good for them. They're able to get Landry Shamet on a pretty team-friendly deal because of restricted free agency and have him as a young piece going forward. That'll be a home run. But on the other hand, if he doesn't look great, if somebody picked around that range looks really awesome all of a sudden very early on in their career, and maybe Landry Shamet is on another team the season after this one, well, you're going to be pretty down on that move. It's very difficult right now just for me to project forward that much and say, this was good or this was bad. He's probably, of anybody, maybe aside from Ayton, because I am endlessly obsessed with watching and caring about and thinking about DeAndre Ayton, I think Shamet might be right there with him in terms of the players I'm most excited to look at and watch and monitor this year. And it just makes the evaluation of that trade in the offseason overall pretty hard. But I would say from what we know and the fact that there is some upside to it and some incompleteness to it, I just still you can't do lower than a B-. I would probably put it at a straight B, because I do think there were opportunities in front of them to get some difference maker players with some of the money that they currently still have that they just chose to bypass. I think you could imagine a situation where, Elfrid Payton really is as bad as Knicks fans were saying he was. That, I'm starting to believe a little bit more in the Frank Kaminsky thing. But what if Abdul Nader is not capable of stepping up a level in the rotation? Like, they are facing down some players playing, especially in the regular season, who are worse than others. And they didn't necessarily go out there and get a surefire playoff level difference maker aside from JaVale McGee. So a lot to continue to monitor, but I just don't think you can hate it. You can't look at the Suns offseason and say that was a disaster, because they did so well on so many of the components. So just felt like that was a good thing to zoom back, look up from 30,000 feet and just say, what really was going on? Because it was such a weird offseason in the NBA. So much is still just about trades and flexibility and movement and everything else that it's not going to be clear cap space, wait for a free agent and cross your fingers anymore. And you have to kind of judge differently according to that. All right, that will close us out. Thursday edition of Locked On Suns in the bags. Enjoy your Thursday. Enjoy the kickoff of the NFL season. I know that I will. Hopefully by the time you all are listening to this, it's a win by Team USA in these qualifiers, because I'm starting to get nervous. I'm going to hit end on this recording right now and go catch the rest of that game, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.